April 2025 saw 4 executions across the United States, each one the end of a long legal road. Texas, Alabama, and Oklahoma carried out death sentences for crimes that shocked entire communities. Some chose silence. Others spoke final words before their execution. One died by firing squad. These are the men America executed in April 2025. Moises Sandoval Mendoza, executed April 23, 2025, Texas. When Rachelle O'Neal Tollison disappeared from her small-town Texas home in April 2004, neighbors and family members immediately knew something was wrong. Her car was still parked outside, her 6-month-old daughter was alone inside, and the front door stood slightly ajar. A search effort swept through the community, but it would take days before investigators found the grim answer. Behind a neighbor's home, partially concealed by debris, they discovered Rachelle's body. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Suspicion quickly turned to Moises Sandoval Mendoza, a man known to local law enforcement for prior incidents, but never anything close to this level of violence. Investigators tied him to the crime scene through DNA evidence and multiple witness accounts, placing him near Rachelle's home around the time she disappeared. Mendoza initially denied involvement, but later gave conflicting statements that only deepened the case against him. By the end of 2005, a Texas jury found him guilty of capital murder, and he was sentenced to death. Mendoza's time on death row would stretch nearly 2 decades. His attorneys filed numerous appeals, arguing that he had ineffective legal counsel during his original trial, and that he suffered from cognitive impairments that should exempt him from execution. Court after court rejected his claims, affirming that the evidence was overwhelming and the jury's decision stood. By early 2025, Mendoza had exhausted his legal options, and the state set his execution date for April 23. In his final weeks at the Polunsky unit, Mendoza kept a low profile. Guards described him as quiet, spending most of his time reading or staring out the small window of his cell. He declined media interviews and spoke to his legal team only to confirm that he was ready to accept his fate. As the execution date approached, Mendoza requested no special privileges beyond a few extra phone calls to family. On the afternoon of his execution, Mendoza was transferred to the Huntsville unit. He was offered a final meal of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and a Dr. Pepper. The choice was simple, almost unremarkable, but it marked the end of a life where ordinary comforts had long since been stripped away. As evening fell, witnesses, including members of Rachelle's family, gathered behind a glass pane in the execution chamber. Mendoza entered the room under his own power, wearing standard prison whites. He lay calmly on the gurney, as officials secured the straps across his arms and legs. When asked if he had any last words, he turned his head toward the witness room. His voice was steady but low. He apologized directly to Rachelle's family, saying, "I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I hope someday you find peace." After a long pause, he added, "I take full responsibility for what I did." At 6:43 p.m., the lethal injection drugs began flowing into his veins. Mendoza blinked several times, then closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, then stopped. He was pronounced dead at 6:51 p.m. Outside the prison gates, a small group of protesters and victim advocates stood silently, holding signs and candles as the final chapter of a 21-year-old crime came to a close. Mikal Mahdi, executed April 11, 2025, South Carolina. In July 2004, a violent crime spree spanned 3 states, leaving 3 people dead and communities in shock. The man responsible, 21-year-old Mikal Mahdi, began his rampage in Virginia, where a drug deal turned deadly. He then moved to North Carolina, robbing and fatally shooting a convenience store clerk. His final act occurred in South Carolina, where he ambushed off-duty police captain James Myers, shooting him multiple times and setting his body on fire. So Mahdi was apprehended in Florida after a multi-state manhunt. He was extradited to South Carolina, where he was convicted of Myers' murder and sentenced to death in 2006. In 2011, he received a life sentence in North Carolina for the earlier killing. So Mahdi, over the years, Mahdi's legal team filed numerous appeals, citing his traumatic childhood and alleged ineffective counsel. They argued that his upbringing, marked by abuse and neglect, was not adequately considered during sentencing. Despite these efforts, both the South Carolina Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court denied relief. Governor Henry McMaster also declined to grant clemency. So Mahdi, faced with the choice of execution methods, lethal injection, electrocution, or firing squad, Mahdi selected the firing squad, which he viewed as the least painful option. His attorney described this choice as choosing the lesser of three evils. On the day of his execution at Broad River Correctional Institution, Mahdi was offered a final meal of ribeye steak, mushroom risotto, broccoli, collard greens, cheesecake, and sweet tea. He declined to make a final statement. At 6:01 p.m., Mahdi was strapped into a chair, a target placed over his heart. 3 prison volunteers fired simultaneously. Witnesses reported that Mahdi cried out upon being shot, moved briefly, and then became still. He was pronounced dead at 6:05 p.m. So Mahdi's execution was the second by firing squad in South Carolina in recent months, following the state's resumption of capital punishment after a 13-year hiatus. It marked the 5th such execution in the United States since 1976. So Mahdi's execution drew criticism from advocates who highlighted Mahdi's troubled past and questioned the humanity of the firing squad method. Nonetheless, the state proceeded, bringing closure to a case that had lingered for over 2 decades. James Osgood, executed April 24, 2025, Alabama. On October 25, 2010, Tracy Lynn Brown's life was violently stolen from her. The 44-year-old mother, a beloved figure in her Clanton, Alabama, community, was found murdered in her home. She had been sexually assaulted, stabbed multiple times, and her throat brutally slit. What made this crime even more disturbing was the involvement of someone close to her, James Osgood. Osgood, along with his girlfriend Tanya Vandyck, was arrested for the murder. The crime was gruesome, and Osgood's motives were chilling. In a confession, he explained that he and Vandyck had concocted a twisted fantasy of kidnapping and torturing a victim. Tracy, who was a cousin to Vandyck, had become an unfortunate target. Osgood's admission revealed the depth of their depravity, as they planned the murder not out of passion, but out of a perverse desire for control and suffering. The horror of this crime shocked not just the small town, but the entire state. In 2014, Osgood was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. His trial was marked by his chilling confession, which provided little to no defense against the brutal facts of his actions. His past, filled with violent tendencies, didn't offer any hope for rehabilitation. After years of legal battles, his sentence was upheld. Despite the appeals, Osgood's fate seemed sealed. In 2025, he made the shocking decision to waive all further appeals, stating that he no longer wanted to prolong his life. "He took a life, so mine was forfeited," Osgood said, resigning himself to the death penalty that had been looming over him for so many years. On April 24, 2025, Osgood was executed by lethal injection at the Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. As the day arrived, Osgood declined his final meal, choosing instead to face his fate without request or ceremony. He was led into the execution chamber at 6 p.m. with a calm demeanor. As the staff prepared him for the lethal injection, Osgood was given one final opportunity to speak. He chose not to ask for mercy, not to deny his actions, but instead, he offered a simple statement: "I took a life, so mine was forfeited." His words echoed in the room, a stark acceptance of the consequences of his brutal crime. The execution process began at 6:05 p.m. Osgood was strapped to the gurney as the lethal chemicals began to flow through his veins. His final moments were quiet, with no struggles or resistance. At 6:35 p.m., but he was pronounced dead, his execution marking the end of a long and tragic journey for both him and the family of Tracy Lynn Brown. For Tracy's family, The pain of her murder could never be erased by the execution of Osgood. Justice had been served, but it did little to bring back the mother, daughter, and friend that had been so violently taken from them. Still, Osgood's death brought closure to a case that had haunted them for over a decade. His final words were a grim acknowledgement that there is no undoing the past, only facing the consequences for the lives lost. Michael Tanzi was executed by lethal injection on April 8, 2025 at Florida State Prison. He was 45 years old and had spent nearly 23 years on Florida's death row for the 2000 kidnapping and murder of 68-year-old Richard Lavoie. His execution marked Florida's first of the year. The crime occurred on April 19, 2000. Tanzy, then 21, had been recently released from a halfway house in Miami-Dade County. According to court records, he was unemployed, homeless, and attempting to obtain a vehicle when he approached Richard Lavoie in a parking lot. Lavoie, a retired airline worker who had been in the area for a dental appointment, was reportedly approached under the pretense of giving Tanzy a ride. Shortly after Lavoie agreed to help, Tanzy pulled a firearm and forced him into the trunk of his own car. Over the next several hours, Tanzy drove around South Florida with Lavoie confined in the trunk. Testimony revealed that Tanzy made multiple stops at gas stations and ATM machines, attempting to withdraw money from Lavoie's accounts using his bank cards and personal identification number. Surveillance footage and receipts later corroborated his movements across the region. At some point during this time, Tanzy strangled Lavoie using a belt. He later abandoned the victim's body in an industrial area in northwest Miami-Dade County. The vehicle was recovered not long after, and Tanzy was apprehended within days. During questioning, he gave a full confession to law enforcement, including details that matched forensic findings. Tanzy was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, and carjacking. His trial began in 2002, and he was convicted on all counts. The jury recommended the death penalty by a unanimous vote. The court imposed the sentence later that year. His post-conviction motions were denied by both state and federal courts. In early 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis signed the death warrant, setting an execution date for April 8. Tanzy did not seek clemency. On the day of his execution, Tanzy was transferred to the death chamber at Florida State Prison in Rayford. Witnesses said he remained quiet and declined to make any final statement. The Department of Corrections did not publicly release details of his final meal. The lethal injection process began at 6 p.m. and was declared complete by 6:19 p.m. Richard Lavoie's family did not attend the execution but released a statement saying they were relieved the case had reached its conclusion. Tanzy was pronounced dead after nearly 23 years on death row. As we conclude this chapter on the inmates executed in April 2025, we're reminded of the complexities and profound emotions that accompany each of these stories. Each execution represents not just the end of a life, but the culmination of years of legal battles, choices made, and consequences that echo through the lives of victims, families, and communities. The final meals, the last words, they are glimpses into the final moments of individuals whose crimes left indelible scars on the fabric of society. Whether you believe in the death penalty or not, these stories bring us face to face with the harsh realities of justice, human frailty, and the deep questions that linger long after the execution is over. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more in-depth looks into the world of crime, justice, and the lives behind the headlines. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.